Captain Jake Morrison pressed his hands against the cold metal railing of the bridge and stared at the massive object floating in space before them. The thing was huge, bigger than any city he had ever seen back on Earth. It looked like a giant metal tube stretched across the darkness, with strange lights blinking along its surface like sleeping eyes. Lisa Cameron looked up from her computer screen and shook her head. The readings made no sense at all. Energy was coming from inside the alien structure, but it was unlike anything humans had ever discovered. The patterns were too complex and too organized to be natural. Commander Alex Rodriguez checked his equipment one more time before heading to the shuttle bay. As the best soldier on the ship, he would lead the team that went inside the mysterious object. Dr. Kevin Walsh walked beside him, carrying tools that might help them understand what they found inside. The shuttle moved slowly toward the alien structure. Rodriguez felt his heart beating fast as they got closer. The metal surface looked smooth and perfect, like it had been built yesterday instead of thousands of years ago. Strange symbols covered parts of the hull, glowing with soft blue light. Walsh pointed to what looked like a doorway. The opening was just the right size for humans to walk through, which seemed very strange. Why would aliens build doors that fit humans so perfectly? As their shuttle got closer, the door began to open by itself. Rodriguez led his team through the doorway and into a long hallway filled with soft light. The walls were covered with more glowing symbols, and the air felt warm and clean. It was as if the structure had been waiting for them to arrive. They walked for what felt like hours through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Every step they took made soft sounds that echoed through the empty halls. Finally, they reached a huge room filled with floating screens and holographic displays. Walsh approached one of the displays carefully. When he touched it, the screen came to life and began showing images of stars and planets. The pictures moved and changed, telling a story about a great civilization that had once ruled the galaxy millions of years ago. Morrison watched from the ship as his team sent back reports about what they were finding. The alien library contained records of dozens of different species, all advanced and powerful. But something had happened to all of them. The records showed that they had all disappeared, one by one. Cameron discovered something troubling in the energy readings. The structure was not just showing them information. It was also scanning them, learning about human biology and technology. Whatever had built this place was studying them just as much as they were studying it. Walsh found the central computer and began trying to understand the alien language. The symbols were complex, but patterns started to emerge. The more he learned, the more worried he became. This was not just a library or museum. It was something much more dangerous. The holographic displays suddenly changed, and a new figure appeared in the center of the room. The alien was tall and thin, with skin that looked like metal and eyes that glowed with the same blue light as the symbols on the walls. It spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The alien introduced itself as Keeper Zethver, the last guardian of the predecessor civilization. It explained that by entering the library, humans had triggered something called the Inheritor Protocol. This was a test that would determine if humanity was worthy of joining the galactic community. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine as Zethver continued speaking. The test was not optional. Every human world and colony now had exactly 1 galactic year to prove their worth. If they failed, automated defense systems scattered throughout the galaxy would destroy every human settlement. Walsh asked about the other species shown in the records. Zethver explained that they had all taken the same test. Some had passed and joined the predecessor civilization. Others had failed and been eliminated. The test was designed to find the strongest and most capable species in the galaxy. Cameron made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden deep in the computer files were records that Zethver had not mentioned. The predecessors had not disappeared naturally. They had gone into a deep sleep, waiting for the right species to wake them up and serve as their army in a coming war. Morrison realized that his team had stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple first contact situation. The predecessors were not looking for equals or partners. They were looking for servants and soldiers to fight their battles for them. The holographic keeper began to fade away, but not before delivering one final message. The test had begun, and humanity would face challenges designed to push them to their absolute limits. Only by proving their strength and intelligence could they hope to survive what was coming. As Rodriguez led his team back to their shuttle, he could not shake the feeling that they had just made a terrible mistake. By exploring the alien structure, they had doomed their entire species to fight for their lives against impossible odds. The ancient code that had helped humans survive and win on Earth would now be tested on a galactic scale. President Helen Brooks stood before the Emergency Council meeting in Geneva, her face pale but determined. 3 months had passed since Captain Morrison's discovery, and Earth was no longer the same peaceful world it had been. Every human colony was now preparing for war against an enemy they barely understood. Admiral Carl Hughes commanded the hastily built human defense fleet from his flagship, the Guardian. The ship was massive, filled with the most advanced weapons humanity could build in just 3 months. But Hughes knew it would not be enough against technology that was millions of years old. Commander Beth Martinez pointed to the tactical display, showing enemy movements near the outer colonies. Strange ships had begun appearing throughout human space, attacking settlements and then disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. Each attack seemed designed to test different aspects of human military capability. Dr. Ryan Foster worked day and night in the underground laboratories beneath CERN, trying to understand how predecessor technology actually worked. The energy readings made no sense according to human physics. The aliens seemed able to bend the basic laws of the universe to their will. On the mining colony of New Denver, civilian engineer Amy Collins watched the early warning sensors with growing concern. Her small settlement was home to 3,000 miners and their families. They had no military ships and no trained soldiers, just industrial equipment and the determination to protect their homes. The first attack came without warning. Predecessor drones appeared in the asteroid field around New Denver, moving with impossible speed and precision. Collins watched helplessly as the automated defense platforms were destroyed within minutes. Hughes received the distress call from New Denver while his fleet was engaged with enemy forces near Mars. He could not spare any ships to help the mining colony. The civilians would have to defend themselves using whatever they could find. Collins had an idea that seemed crazy, but might actually work. The mining equipment on New Denver was designed to break apart asteroids and move massive amounts of rock and metal. With some modifications, the same tools could be turned into weapons. Foster made a breakthrough in his research when he stopped trying to understand predecessor technology using human science. Instead, he began looking for patterns that went beyond the physics humans had discovered. The aliens were not breaking natural laws. They were using laws that humans had never learned. Martinez tracked the movement patterns of enemy ships and found something interesting. The attacks were not random. Each assault targeted specific human capabilities, as if the predecessors were studying human military tactics and trying to find weaknesses. Collins and her team worked frantically to modify their mining equipment. They turned rock cutters into energy weapons and converted cargo haulers into mobile artillery. When the next wave of predecessor drones arrived, they were met with a defense that made no tactical sense but somehow worked. The mining laser that was designed to cut through solid rock proved surprisingly effective against alien armor. The industrial explosives meant for breaking up asteroids created devastating attacks against enemy formations. Most importantly, the human defenders fought with a creativity that the automated systems could not predict. Hughes watched the battle. Reports from New Denver with amazement. A small civilian colony was successfully fighting off attacks that had destroyed military installations. The secret was not superior firepower, but human ingenuity and the willingness to try impossible solutions. Morrison's team discovered another alien archive hidden in the outer system. This one belonged to a species called the Kethmari, who had faced the predecessor tests 50,000 years ago. The records they left behind contained a warning that chilled Morrison to the bone. The Kethmari had passed all the tests and proven themselves worthy of joining the predecessor civilization, but success had not brought them freedom. Instead, they had become servants and soldiers in the predecessor's grand plan for galactic domination. Foster realized that the tests were not designed to identify worthy partners for the predecessors. They were designed to find the most capable species to serve as weapons in a war that had been going on for millions of years. Humanity was not being evaluated for membership in a galactic community. They were being recruited as an army. Collins led her miners in a final desperate battle against a massive predecessor war machine that had emerged from deep space, the Alien. Construct was the size of a small moon and carried enough firepower to destroy entire planets. But it had one weakness that its builders had never considered. The war machine was designed to fight logical enemies who followed predictable tactical patterns. Human defenders who used mining equipment as weapons and attacked with strategies that made no military sense created scenarios that the ancient programming could not handle. Martinez developed new battle tactics based on the principle of controlled chaos. Instead of following standard military doctrine, human forces began using random and seemingly irrational maneuvers that confused enemy targeting systems and allowed smaller human ships to defeat much larger alien vessels. Hughes realized that humanity's greatest strength in this war would not be their technology or their numbers. It would be their ability to think outside the established rules and find solutions that no rational species would ever attempt. The 3-month mark passed, and humanity had survived the initial phase of the Inheritor Protocol. But Foster's research suggested that the real tests were just beginning. The predecessors had been watching and learning, and they would soon adapt their tactics to counter human unpredictability. Brooks addressed the people of Earth one final time before the next phase began. She reminded them that the ancient code that had helped humans survive and win throughout their history was still their greatest weapon. No matter what challenges lay ahead, humanity would find a way to turn survival into victory. Dr. Kevin Walsh descended deeper into the predecessor archive than any human had gone before. 6 months had passed since the discovery, and humanity had survived wave after wave of tests. But the deeper Walsh dug into the alien records, the more disturbed he became by what he found. General Patricia Stone coordinated Earth's defenses from the Sol System Command Center, a massive underground facility that had been built in record time. Her strategic advisor, Colonel Frank Turner, had identified patterns in the predecessor, attacks that suggested something far more sinister than simple testing. The alien assaults were not just measuring human capabilities. They were training humanity, forcing rapid evolution in military tactics and technology. Every battle made human forces stronger and more adaptable, as if the predecessors were deliberately shaping humanity into the perfect weapon. On the research vessel Discovery, xenobiologist Dr. Nancy Wright made first contact with a surviving member of an alien species called the Velter. The creature had been hiding in the dark spaces between star systems for thousands of years. Avoiding detection by predecessor monitoring systems, the alien, who called themselves Sci-Fi, explained that the galaxy was divided into 2 groups. There were those who served the sleeping predecessors and those who hid in the shadows, refusing to take the tests that would make them slaves. The Velter were among the few species that had learned the truth about the Inheritor Protocol, Walsh discovered. Records buried so deep in the archive that even Keeper Zethver seemed unaware of their existence. These files revealed the real purpose behind the predecessor civilization's elaborate testing system. They were preparing for a war against an enemy from another galaxy entirely. The approaching threat was so powerful that the predecessors had chosen to retreat into hibernation rather than face it directly. Their plan was to use lesser species as soldiers while they remained safely hidden in their sleep chambers, waiting for the danger to pass. Turner analyzed battle reports from across human space and found evidence that supported Walsh's discoveries. The predecessor attacks were becoming more sophisticated, but they were also teaching human forces to fight in very specific ways. Humanity was being molded into an army designed to face a particular type of enemy, Wright learned from Sci-Fi. that the predecessors' ultimate goal was not conquest of their own galaxy. They intended to use their trained slave armies to fight the approaching extragalactic invaders, sacrificing millions of lives to protect their own sleeping forms. Foster made a breakthrough in understanding predecessor technology that horrified him. The advanced systems did not just require massive amounts of energy to function. They actually consumed the life force of sentient beings, converting living consciousness into raw power for their weapons and machines. Every species that had passed the predecessor tests had eventually been fed into these machines. Their technological advancement and military prowess had made them perfect fuel for the ancient civilization's war effort. The tests were not looking for partners or even servants. They were identifying the highest quality raw material, stone-faced and impossible. Decision as reports came in from around the globe. The predecessor testing was entering a new phase, and humanity would soon be forced to choose between submission and annihilation. The alien systems were offering humanity a simple choice: serve willingly or be destroyed. HFY warned right. That species who refused the tests faced immediate extinction. The predecessors had automated war machines hidden throughout the galaxy, programmed to eliminate any civilization that might pose a threat to their sleeping masters. No species had ever survived a direct confrontation with these ancient weapons. Walsh found evidence that the approaching extragalactic threat was not a conquering army but something far worse. The entities coming from beyond the galaxy were refugees fleeing from some catastrophe that had destroyed their home. The predecessors knew this but planned to commit genocide rather than risk their own safety. Turner presented his analysis to the Earth Council, explaining that humanity had, perhaps weeks before the final phase of testing began. The predecessors would soon demand a definitive answer, join their sleeping civilization as willing servants, or face total annihilation by weapons that had destroyed countless worlds. Foster's team discovered that predecessor technology had one significant weakness. It was designed to counter logical, rational opponents who followed predictable patterns. The ancient systems had difficulty adapting to truly chaotic and irrational behavior, which explained why human tactics had been so effective. Wright established a secret communication network with other refugee species, hiding throughout the galaxy. Many civilizations had been watching humanity's progress with amazement. Having never seen a species survive the predecessor tests for so long while maintaining their independence, Brooks convened an emergency session of the United Earth Parliament to make the most important decision in human history. The choice was stark and simple: accept slavery and possible survival, or maintain freedom and face certain death. There seemed to be no middle ground. ZAPHH AI revealed the location of other sleeping predecessor installations throughout the galaxy. These hidden facilities contained the hibernating forms of the ancient rulers, along with control systems for their automated armies. If humanity could somehow reach these installations, they might be able to change the rules of the game. Walsh made one final discovery that changed everything. Deep in the most protected files of the archive, he found records of the predecessor's original plan. They had not always been the sleeping tyrants they had become. Once they had been explorers and builders until fear of the approaching threat had turned them into something monstrous. The revelation gave Brooks and the Earth Council a third option that no one had considered before. Instead of choosing between submission and destruction, humanity could try to wake the predecessors and convince them to face their fears. It was an impossible plan that would require incredible courage and sacrifice. Turner began planning for a war unlike anything in galactic history. Humanity would not just fight for survival, they would fight to change the nature of the galaxy itself. The ancient code of survival and victory would be tested against opponents who had ruled the stars for millions of years. President Helen Brooks stood before the combined representatives of every nation on Earth and made the announcement that would echo throughout the galaxy. Humanity would not submit to the predecessors, nor would they flee into hiding like other species had done. Instead, they would find a third option that no civilization had ever attempted before: The decision triggered the Inheritor Protocol's punishment phase within hours. Ancient war machines that had been dormant for millions of years suddenly activated across the galaxy. Massive battle stations emerged from hidden locations in dead systems, all converging on human space with weapons that could destroy entire worlds. Admiral Carl Hughes watched from the bridge of the Guardian as his sensors detected the approaching predecessor fleet. The enemy force was beyond anything humanity had ever faced. Ships the size of moons, energy weapons that could crack planets, and technology so advanced it seemed like magic itself. Dr. Ryan Foster's research team worked frantically in their underground laboratories as the first predecessor assault began. They had discovered that the ancient technology operated on principles that seemed impossible, but Foster believed that impossibility itself might be humanity's greatest weapon. The battle for Earth began when predecessor drones entered the solar system in numbers that blocked out the stars. Hughes led the human defense fleet in a desperate charge against odds of 1,000 to 1. Every tactical manual said the battle was already lost, but humans had never been good at following manuals. Commander Beth Martinez coordinated the defense using strategies that made no logical sense. Human ships attacked in patterns that seemed random and chaotic, making decisions that violated every principle of space warfare. The predecessor systems, designed to counter rational opponents, began experiencing system failures trying to predict human behavior. On the mining colony of New Denver, Amy Collins had transformed her industrial settlement into a fortress that defied military logic. Mining equipment had been converted into weapons that should not have worked but somehow did. When predecessor forces attacked the colony, they encountered defenses that their programming could not comprehend. Foster made the breakthrough that changed everything when he stopped trying to make predecessor technology work according to human physics. Instead, he began building weapons that should not function at all, devices that operated on principles of pure impossibility. The results were devastating to enemy forces that relied on predictable physical laws across human space. Ordinary people like mechanic Tony Blake and teacher Maria Santos organized civilian resistance networks using tactics that no military academy would ever teach. They discovered that predecessor control systems could be confused by human emotional responses, something the logical ancients had never programmed their machines to handle. Wright and the alien refugees HFY worked together to decode the master control frequencies that governed all predecessor technology. Hidden deep in the ancient programming was a kill switch that could shut down their war machines, but activating it would require accessing the central control nexus. The nexus was located in the heart of the original predecessor archive, now revealed as a massive command center protected by layers of automated defenses. Morrison volunteered to lead a suicide mission to reach the control room. Knowing that the chances of survival were essentially zero, Hughes coordinated the largest space battle in galactic history as human and refugee alien forces fought to clear a path to the archive. The defenders used every trick they had learned about confusing predecessor systems, attacking with such chaotic unpredictability that the ancient algorithms began to break down. Foster's impossible weapons proved their worth as human forces engaged predecessor battle stations that had never been defeated. Energy cannons that violated thermodynamics, shields that worked by refusing to acknowledge incoming damage, and missiles that arrived at their targets before they were fired. Blake and his civilian teams discovered that they could disrupt predecessor ground forces by doing things that made absolutely no tactical sense. Dancing while fighting, using tools as weapons in ways they were never designed for, and following battle plans that changed randomly every few minutes. Morrison's team fought their way through the archive's defenses using the same principle that had made humanity successful throughout the war. When faced with impossible situations, they simply refused to accept that the situations were actually impossible. Walls that could not be breached were breached. Weapons that could not be defeated were defeated. The battle reached its climax when Morrison reached the central control room and found himself face to face with Keeper Zethver, the ancient guardian. explained that humanity had proven themselves worthy not of slavery but of something much greater. They had shown that the impossible could be made possible through sheer determination. ZETHVA are revealed that the kill switch was not just a way to shut down predecessor technology. It was a test of worthiness that no species had ever passed before. By choosing to fight for freedom rather than accepting servitude, humanity had demonstrated qualities that the predecessors themselves had lost long ago. Right activated the master control frequency from the research vessel Discovery, sending the shutdown signal throughout the galaxy. Predecessor war machines that had terrorized civilizations for millions of years simply stopped functioning, their ancient programming finally accepting that some things were more important than logic. The immediate threat was over, but Foster's long-range sensors detected something new approaching from beyond the galaxy. The extra-galactic entities that the predecessors had been preparing to fight were finally arriving, and they brought with them technology that made the ancients look primitive. Hughes regrouped his battered fleet and prepared for a new kind of war. Humanity had proven that they could defeat enemies who relied on logic and predictable behavior. But the approaching threat operated on principles that even human impossibility might not be able to overcome. Brooks addressed the galaxy from the captured predecessor archive, explaining that humanity's victory was not an ending but a beginning. The ancient code of survival and victory had evolved into something greater, the determination to protect not just human life, but all life in the galaxy. The real test was just beginning. Humanity's rebellion against the Inheritor Protocol had an effect that no one expected. Deep in hidden chambers throughout the galaxy, the predecessors themselves began to wake from their million-year sleep. The shutdown of their automated systems had triggered emergency protocols that brought the ancient rulers back to consciousness. Emperor Kethvalith the Eternal emerged from his stasis chamber aboard a world ship hidden in the galactic core. He was furious to discover that his carefully planned preparation for the coming war had been disrupted by creatures he considered barely evolved animals. The humans would pay for their interference. The predecessor fleet that answered Kethvalith's call was beyond imagination. Ships that were entire worlds unto themselves, weapons that could rearrange matter at the atomic level, and technology that had been perfected over millions of years of galactic domination. Each vessel carried the sleeping forms of billions of predecessor citizens. Admiral Carl Hughes found himself facing an enemy that made their previous battles look like training exercises. The predecessor Emperor's personal flagship was larger than Earth's moon and carried enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. Human technology, even enhanced with captured alien systems, seemed pathetically inadequate, but humanity's defiance had already changed the galactic balance of power in ways that Kethvalith had not anticipated. Species that had hidden in the dark spaces between stars for millennia began emerging from their refuges, inspired by the impossible victory of the humans against predecessor automation. Dr. Nancy Wright coordinated with representatives from dozens of refugee civilizations, all eager to fight alongside the species that had taught the galaxy a new way to resist ancient tyranny. The Velter, the Ishkari, the Novan Republic, and dozens of other cultures brought their own unique capabilities to the growing alliance. Each refugee species had developed different survival strategies during their long exile. Some had mastered stealth technology that could hide entire fleets. Others had learned to manipulate space and time in ways that confused predecessor sensors. All of them shared one crucial trait. They had learned from humanity that sometimes the only winning move was to refuse to play by established rules. Hughes commanded not just human vessels, but an alliance fleet composed of the galaxy's survivors and outcasts. The combined force was still vastly outnumbered by the awakening predecessor armada, but diversity of tactics and the element of surprise gave them advantages that pure numbers could not overcome. The war began in earnest when Kethvalith ordered a direct assault on Earth itself. The Emperor wanted to make an example of the world that had dared to challenge his authority. The Sol System would become a monument to the price of defying the natural order of the galaxy. Dr. Ryan Foster's research teams had weaponized the Sol system itself during the months of preparation. Solar flares could be directed like artillery, gravitational fields had been turned into defensive barriers, and even the orbital mechanics of planets had been converted into weapons that defied conventional understanding. The battle for Earth became legendary throughout the galaxy, not because humanity won through superior firepower, but because they turned the fundamental forces of nature into tools of war. Kethvalith's massive fleet found itself fighting not just human ships, but the star system itself. Meanwhile, long-range sensors detected the approach of the extragalactic entities that the predecessors had spent eons preparing to fight. The beings from beyond the galaxy made even the awakened predecessors look like children playing with primitive toys. Their technology operated on principles that transcended physical reality. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding the war effort from the captured predecessor archive, made a discovery that changed everything. The extragalactic entities were not invaders seeking conquest. They were refugees fleeing from something that had destroyed their home galaxy, just as the hidden species in this galaxy were refugees from predecessor tyranny. Morrison's team uncovered the truth that Kethvalith had hidden even from his own people. The entities approaching from beyond were survivors of a cosmic catastrophe that had consumed an entire galaxy. They were seeking shelter, not conquest, but the predecessors had decided that genocide was preferable to sharing space with outsiders. The revelation split the predecessor forces as some of Kethvalith's own commanders began questioning their emperor's methods. A civil war erupted within the ancient civilization as younger predecessors, who had awakened to find their empire crumbling, chose to side with the human alliance. Hughes coordinated the defense of multiple star systems as the extragalactic refugees began arriving in force. Their ships were unlike anything in this galaxy, constructed from materials that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Communication proved difficult because their thoughts operated on entirely different principles. Foster worked with predecessor defectors to develop translation protocols that could bridge the gap between dimensional mathematics and conventional physics. The process was dangerous because human minds were not designed to comprehend the mathematical structures that governed extragalactic technology. The pursuing entities from the destroyed galaxy finally revealed themselves as the refugee fleet settled into uninhabited regions of the galactic rim. They were not conquerors or destroyers, but automated systems left behind by a civilization that had achieved technological transcendence and abandoned physical existence. These cleanup systems had one simple mission: sterilize any galaxy that reached a certain level of technological development to prevent it from following their creator's path to transcendence. They viewed physical existence as a disease that needed to be cured through complete annihilation of all matter and energy. Kethvalith, faced with the truth about the threat he had spent eons preparing to fight, made a decision that surprised everyone in the galaxy. He ordered his forces to stand down and offered to work with humanity. Acknowledging that their approach might succeed where his had already failed, the Emperor's decision came too late to prevent the arrival of the cleanup systems, massive constructs that began systematically converting matter into pure energy across the outer regions of the galaxy. Everything they touched simply ceased to exist. Erased from reality itself, Wright established communication with the cleanup systems and learned that their programming was absolute. They would continue their work until every trace of technological civilization had been eliminated from the galaxy. No force in the universe had ever successfully opposed them. Morrison realized that humanity was facing the ultimate test of their ancient code. They had learned to survive and win against impossible odds, but this enemy could not be defeated through conventional means. Victory would require finding a solution that no civilization in galactic history had ever imagined. President Helen Brooks stood before the combined councils of every free species in the galaxy and proposed something that no civilization had ever attempted. Instead of choosing between genocide and extinction, humanity would try to save everyone, including their enemies. The plan seemed impossible even by human standards. Dr. Ryan Foster's team worked with predecessor scientists and extragalactic refugees to develop technology that could theoretically create a barrier between dimensions. The energy requirements would drain every star in the galaxy, and there was no guarantee the barrier would actually work. Most rational beings considered the project pure fantasy. Admiral Carl Hughes coordinated the largest military operation in galactic history as forces from hundreds of species worked together to hold defensive lines while the barrier project proceeded. Human ships fought alongside predecessor vessels and extragalactic refugee craft in battles that defied every principle of physics. The irony was not lost on anyone involved in the defense. They were protecting the extragalactic refugees while simultaneously trying to keep them separated from this galaxy. The cleanup systems pursuing the refugees would destroy everything if they detected technological civilization above certain thresholds. Amy Collins led civilian engineering teams from dozens of species in constructing the barrier generators. Mining equipment from New Denver worked alongside predecessor construction machines and extragalactic fabrication systems that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The cooperation itself was considered impossible by every expert. Dr. Nancy Wright maintained communication with the cleanup systems, trying to understand their programming well enough to find weaknesses. The automated destroyers were more advanced than anything in either galaxy, but they followed rigid protocols that might be exploited by sufficiently creative thinking. The cleanup systems began their systematic sterilization of the galaxy's outer rim, converting entire star systems into pure energy. Their progress was slow, but absolutely unstoppable. Every defensive measure tried against them simply ceased to exist upon contact with their technology. Foster made a breakthrough when he stopped trying to understand the cleanup systems using conventional science or even predecessor knowledge. Instead, he approached them as if they were a puzzle that could only be solved by thinking in ways that no rational mind would consider. Emperor Kethvalith worked directly with human engineers. For the first time in his millions of years of existence, the ancient ruler found himself amazed by humanity's ability to make impossible things work. Through sheer determination and refusal to accept limitations, Captain Morrison coordinated the defense from a command ship that was part human, part predecessor, and part extragalactic technology. The vessel should not have been able to function, but human engineers had somehow made incompatible systems work together through creative applications of organized chaos. Wright discovered that the cleanup systems had one crucial limitation. Their programming was designed to eliminate technological civilizations, but they had difficulty classifying societies that operated on principles their creators had never encountered. Sufficiently chaotic civilizations might not register as technological threats. The barrier project reached completion. Just as the cleanup systems began moving toward the galaxy's core, Foster's impossible device activated, creating a field that existed in the spaces between dimensions. The barrier did not stop the destroyers, but it did something even more remarkable. Instead of creating a wall between galaxies, the human solution created a translation field that allowed physical and transcendent beings to coexist without triggering the cleanup protocols. The automated systems detected only natural phenomena in the protected regions, completely missing the technological civilizations hiding within. Hughes watched in amazement as the cleanup systems passed through areas containing billions of sentient beings without detecting their presence. The barrier did not hide technology. It translated it into forms that the destroyers could not recognize as artificial constructs. Collins supervised the expansion of the translation field to cover the entire galaxy. The process required converting every technological device to operate on principles of organized impossibility rather than logical engineering. Somehow, the converted systems worked even better than their original versions. Kethvalith admitted to Morrison that humanity had achieved something that his civilization's millions of years of advancement had never made possible. They had found a way to transcend the limitations of physical existence without abandoning physical reality entirely. The cleanup systems completed their survey of the galaxy and began moving toward their next target. Their programming registered the successful elimination of all technological threats in the region. The automated destroyers had accomplished their mission without realizing they had been completely fooled. Right, established permanent communication networks between the hidden civilizations and the extragalactic refugees. The translation field allowed completely different forms of existence to interact safely, creating possibilities for cooperation that had never existed before. Brooks announced the formation of the Galactic Cooperative, an alliance of species that operated on principles of organized impossibility rather than rigid logic. The new civilization would explore the universe using technology that transcended traditional limitations while remaining invisible to automated cleanup systems. Foster's research revealed that the translation field had effects far beyond simple concealment. It allowed consciousness itself to evolve in new directions, creating forms of existence that were neither purely physical nor completely transcendent. The barriers between different levels of reality began to dissolve. Morrison watched as children from dozens of species played together on worlds that existed in the spaces between dimensions. Human children ran alongside young predecessors and extragalactic entities in games that followed rules that changed based on imagination rather than physics. The ancient code that had driven humanity to survive and win had evolved into something greater. The determination to overcome impossible odds had become the drive to ensure that everyone could overcome impossible odds together. Survival was no longer about defeating enemies, but about finding ways for all life to flourish. Hughes retired from military service to become an explorer, leading expeditions into regions of space that existed only when observed by sufficiently creative minds. The universe had become a place where imagination was as important as technology for determining what was possible. The story ended not with humanity ruling the galaxy or replacing the predecessors as galactic overlords. Instead, they became the species that taught the universe a new way to exist. The ancient code of survival and victory had created a future where winning meant helping everyone else win too, and where the greatest victory was making impossible dreams become everyday reality.